Okay, welcome to Behind the DM Screen. This is the podcast where we, the WorldSmith team, talk about tips, tricks, and stories of being a GM, the successes and the pitfalls. As I said, we are the team behind WorldSmith. WorldSmith is a platform, a toolbox for GMs, helps you generate super useful content for your games, endless original content, as well as organize your campaigns. We've had a lot of fun creating it and getting it out to the audience and seeing people use it. And this podcast is kind of a way for us to share some of our expertise as GMs, and because we're really interested in helping people be better GMs. Yeah. I'm Ian. I'm the head of marketing at WorldSmith.
I'm Matt. I'm the CEO.
I'm Cameron. I'm the guy editing this podcast together.
The most important guy.
And he does a lot more than that too. Yeah. Cameron runs like all of our socials and all our creative content and stuff like that.
Anything that's fun, he does.
Yeah, that's true. I do the boring stuff. We're going to start off our last episode. We had a puzzler, which was a little challenge that we kind of threw out to ourselves and to our followers. As a refresher, the puzzler had to do with a knife to the throat situation. I was running a game where I had a wizard with very low hit points. They were captured by a strong knight. They put a knife to their throat. I was really excited. I thought it was a dramatic moment. Quickly realized it was kind of a terrible moment because the worst thing, basically it came around to the wizard's, or rather the knight's turn. If they cut the throat of the wizard, there was a sorcerer who had Cure Wounds. He was standing 15 feet away that could just run in, cast Cure Wounds. The wizard gets re-upped back to full hit point, or not full hit points, but re-upped back to consciousness. Then it's their next initiative order and they can cast a spell. So my question to our larger GM audience and to these two as well is, how would you play that situation at the table?
Okay.
I'm curious.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this for
good.
a while.
I'm really glad.
Matt and I had like a
2
30-minute conversation.
Oh, did you really?
Oh,
that's exciting.
What? We didn't prep at all. This is all off the cuff.
I wasn't here for this, so I'm actually very excited to hear this.
Yeah, okay, what I would do, I think you need a new rule. Okay, you need a hostage rule. I think that if as written, the rules are if you damage a player who is on death saves, you get 1 fail.
Right.
And I think in a hostage situation, there should be a specific rule where if you have a creature grappled, then you can just immediately cut them off.
Kill them.
Right?
All three death saves fail. Done.
So I would, in that moment, establish that rule. It might feel a little cruddy for your players because they might, feel cheated. But as long as you establish the expectations, I think that you're not screwing over the players.
Yeah.
Right?
So essentially just get rid of death saves, right?
Well,
I think that specific instance. Yeah.
If they are grappled. Because obviously if they're on death saves and a fireball goes off, I think it's fair that they don't instantly die, but, it hurt them for sure. Yeah. So that's what I would do. I think grappling can just execute all death saves immediately.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that solution a lot, actually. Part of the reason I like it is it feels like it's based in reality. Yeah. Like it feels like this makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like if someone did have a knife to your throat, they could just kill you instantly. I think your point of establishing the rule beforehand, very smart.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think it's a pretty elegant situation as well, just because it gives somebody a really clear rule set to follow without necessarily needing to change too much. It's not exactly what I would have done. I think in my situation, I think your solution is better, to be clear. But I probably would have just taken a pause and just entered roleplay briefly.
Oh, interesting.
And I think my reason for that is, I sometimes don't follow the combat mechanics when I'm in roleplay with my characters. And that's what I've typically done when somebody's like, okay, there's this guy sleeping here. You assassinate him, or there is something like that. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to make you, let's say this guy has crazy hit points, right? Sure. I'm not going to make you beat their AC and stuff like that. I'm just going to let it happen. I said, okay, I'm going to let everybody enter roleplay.
So it's not initiative order necessarily.
So it's not necessarily initiative order. And then I was going to say, okay, if they decide in roleplay that they still want to attack, all right, this guy has the wizard up against the throat, and he's like, if anyone moves, I'm going to do this, right? Then they have okay, I can try and negotiate with them. I can try and do this, right? But if they decide, hey, I just want to go for it anyway, I'm probably going to just make it be everybody does one move at once kind of a thing.
Right.
And then we see how it all turns out. And then like, if possible, I would do it where like nobody else really knows what the other person is doing, but it's like all happening simultaneously.
That's nice.
That way, like he can do his thing and then the turn's just over kind of a deal.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you guys have had many hostage situations in D&D, but I love keeping initiative order because, your friend's life is on the line, and now you look at your friend Timmy, and it's like, no one's allowed to speak. What do? Do you drop your weapon, or are you going to
like it brings the decision down to a single person and they can't like discuss it with the group?
Yeah, and you have to like everyone gets their turn. What are you going to do? And it makes for I think like you can have role play in combat.
Totally.
I've had characters of mine, specifically this one bard character. He was killed off. He had full health, and he was one-shotted in a role play moment. We weren't in combat. He was just executed, no dice rolled, because the player or the DM wanted to like set expectations for this big bad. And it felt really bad for me because I was like, I had things I wanted to do. I could have avoided that death, and I worked on this character. And that's why I think sticking to combat rules is so critical for life and death situations. Otherwise, you'll just be stewing over that bad moment for a while.
Yeah, it kind of depends. I can see both tables going both ways. I think these are both really elegant solutions, honestly.
Yeah, what did you do?
Oh, I just fumbled completely. Yeah,
I didn't have 2 weeks to think about it.
I had no elegant solution. No, I'm serious. I got in the middle of this and I suddenly realized like, oh, I don't have a solution here. And basically exactly what you would expect to happen happened. They didn't, I think the guy was demanding that they let him go or something, or like, because he was trapped in like a burning building with these other people, and they just didn't. And then he like killed the wizard. I mean, dealt him enough damage to make him unconscious, and then the guy who was a sorcerer like ran up and cast Cure Wounds, and then they ended up defeating this guy. So it's like
that's so lame.
Exactly, it was lame.
It
was lame. So it was definitely for me like a learning experience of like, like if I'm going to think through a combat where that's an option, I need to go in with some kind of a preparation. But it was really interesting. Honestly, I'm torn on which solution my party would have been like more fine with. I think those are both the good ones, and it kind of I think depends on if you've got a crunchy party where people go in who like really want to use their abilities to the max in every situation. I think kind of establishing at maybe the beginning of a combat a certain rule, or maybe even just establishing it as a table rule, right? Because that can be another thing too when you start running a game. Like if you maybe have a short list of these rules and you start running a game, you can just say, hey, just so you know, I have a rule at this table where if an opponent has grappled you and you are basically incapacitated, you know what I mean? Then like they can just kill you if you want and avoid. Because then people are just like, oh dang, like then I should be careful to not get myself in those situations. Then it doesn't feel like you've suddenly just like forced their hand of like I just really want this player to die. You know what I mean? Like then it at least feels like we did know that this was a possibility that we could get into.
This conversation makes me not like death saving throws very much. I feel like it's a bit flawed, especially because non-player characters don't generally have them.
Sure.
Yeah.
I wonder if a better like way to run death saves would be you have one death save and the DC is like 5, but every single round the DC increases.
That's interesting.
That way, you take 1 point of damage and you have to re-roll that death save and it makes the DC go higher.
Yeah.
It could be I don't know.
Death saves are simultaneously sometimes the best parts of the games that I've run where I'm like, oh, it's so cool. It comes down to just this one roll.
The suspense is killing.
But on the other hand, it's sometimes just like the worst part of the games. Remember, I'm like, okay, great. Like, I guess you passed it and now you're unconscious for like 3 hours and it feels weird.
It's not amazing. It's pros and cons to it. But the other thing that I would be worried about, I think as soon as I introduce a rule like that, I think my players will try and abuse it too.
They'll try to use it back.
Yeah, because they'll say, okay, this guy like grapples this NPC or like this guy grapples this monster, right? And like I have a knife to his throat. Like,
well, I mean, if
I can drop him to 0 HP.
If he's at 0 HP regardless, he's probably dead. Like,
it's true. Yeah.
I only give. Do you guys give death saves to important NPCs?
No,
I don't. I actually haven't ever. Yeah.
Well, I will say this: I've had like a boss that when they get dropped to 0, I want them to have some kind of a final dialogue moment or something. You know what I mean? So I've kind of had a boss that's like, oh, like they're dying, they're bleeding out. They say a final thing or they like lift up their hand and cast this one, not like a spell that deals damage, but they do something to kind of wrap up the fight.
Totally.
But no, I haven't really done like randomized death saves. Is that something you've done?
I have, but it's I got to be more like strict with it, because the only time I really do it is when the party has like an NPC
that they bring with them.
They've been with them for like 6 months, you know, and they love this character.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, oh, he just dropped to 0. Do I just have him like get beheaded mid combat and like, oh, you can't cure wounds him, you know, because he's dead? Like, I don't know. It gets a little tricky, because at the end of the day, like story wise, a PC is no different than an NPC. They're all just characters in the story. So why should he, like, cure wounds bring one person up and not another?
I love killing NPCs.
Yeah,
because then I just feel like then it makes the monsters feel like way more real. Where you're like, that guy just died. Like that guy just got like punched in the head and died, and then the players are all like, ah.
That's a very.
But I see your point. It does make certain magic feel weird. Where it does feel like if you have someone who's casting cure wounds all the time, it does feel like, why can't I just bring that guy back? But
sure. I guess that's what Revivify is for.
Honestly, even
I know there are spells in the game that do bring people back from the dead, so I guess we can't complain too much.
Yeah. Oh, man. But yeah, I was gonna say, as soon as you asked the question, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. I do it when it's an NPC that's in the party, like kind of their pet NPC, which is, I probably shouldn't do that, honestly. Yeah,
I just have NPCs run away from combat normally. That's my solution. I'm like, you guys are way braver than all of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you for your thoughts. Those were both way more elegant solutions than I did. So
I'm sure somebody watching has a much better solution too.
I'd still be very curious to hear your responses. We'll do another puzzler maybe in the next episode or two. Okay. Next we're going to answer a randomized question from our Discord users. WorldSmith has a Discord. It's super rad. A bunch of really good GMs on there pitching ideas, making parties. If you want to join into a game or find like-minded people to play with, you should hop on our Discord.
I'll link it in the bio, so please join it.
Awesome. Okay, so we have some questions. What we're going to do is first we're going to roll for initiative amongst ourselves in what order that we have to answer the question.
9.
14. Ooh. 11. Ooh. Okay, so I'll go. Cameron will go. Then Matt. Okay, let's see what question we are answering. We each have a minute or two to answer.
1.
Oh, I rolled in that one. Ooh, I like this question. If you could add one class to D&D, what would it be?
Ooh.
Well, you have to go first.
You gotta go first.
We get time to think about it.
That's a good question.
That is a good question. Because, like, there's the easy answer, like, oh, Artificer. You know?
Yeah.
But that's, like, already
it
kind
is,
of in
yeah.
D&D.
Oh, that's a real class. Yeah. It has to be. Okay, this is going to be mine. This is definitely just because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. But I think, so in AD&D, classes was like less of a thing. It was more like you kind of just like picked a race, and then generally they kind of like went a little like you actually picked a race or a class basically. Right. You couldn't be like a half orc barbarian. You were either a half orc or you were a barbarian. And the thing that I really kind of miss a lot is the way that halflings used to play in old D&D, which is like basically their only thing going for them is that they are hard to find. They are very good at hiding.
Yeah.
They're like really good at like stealing, like kind of like not like stealing in a rogue way, but like they're good at like sneaking around a little bit, nimble, and they're very lucky and like kind of charismatic and like charming and good at like having resources go a long way. I feel like it's not exactly a bard, and it's like not exactly a rogue. Like I feel like I want there to be a class that's like I don't even know what you would call it, like a pilgrim or something, like someone who like a wanderer, someone who's like along for the ride, but then you could still find some cool abilities that you could build maybe around them creating like good synergy amongst like a party, or maybe they can make like your short rest or your long rest better. It's kind of similar to
utility support type
support. So in some ways like similar to Bard, but I think like Bard has gone like very kind of hard down this route of like performer, charismatic kind of thing. And I'd kind of be looking for someone who's a little bit like a bumbler, like someone who just is kind of like going along through the adventure, and they have kind of like a task, and they like tend to be kind of like lucky and like good at kind of like getting through situations. But maybe less of like a trained warrior. Because I think sometimes I find myself building a character for that, where I'm like, oh, I kind of want my person to be like the common, person from the village who then kind of like ends up on this quest a little bit. But then I kind of end up, just building them down a D&D class, and then it's just too tempting to not use all of their super strong combat abilities because you're in combat. Yeah. And I would much prefer to have it be like, oh, it'd actually be better for my character to be like wielding a frying pan and like running around and like hitting people, in the kneecaps
just
with
randomly.
it. Yeah. Like and again, this speaks very much to my play style and my interest in the fantasy world, but like that's. I wish I had. I don't know the we'll call it the pilgrim. That would be the class that I would add to D&D.
No, I love that. I have a barbarian in my party right now who's like a chef. He has the chef feat.
Oh, fun!
And he uses a frying pan to attack.
Nice.
And like I'm convinced if he could just choose to be a full-time chef and have no barbarian abilities, he would take that in a heartbeat.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Okay, it's so difficult to come up with a new class because they really do cover most.
They cover most of it.
They cover a lot of areas.
I think it'd be cool to explore more with like possession,
Oh, that's
like
cool.
maybe some kind of cursed one class where
like
you
that.
could get certain abilities or benefits from being possessed.
Yeah.
That was really the only thing that came to mind. I
like that, actually. I think it's a strong idea.
I love the idea, like with Druid, the thing that I loved about Druid is how unique I felt wild shaping. I felt like I had this quirk that no one else had, right? And I think being possessed opens up that door as well, where, you could have some kind of subclass where your possession, like, could transform you physically into whatever creature possessed you, or it could have psychic abilities, right? I think it opens the doors for a lot of
and it could even see, like, there could even be a subclass of that's more like lycanthropy, like a werewolf thing.
Yeah,
because I've seen
like the blood hunter.
I think a lot of people want to play some kind of like a shape changer or something,
right,
but I think that people struggle to do it. Even I've even had games where people have been bitten by werewolves. I'm a player in a game right now that like lycanthropy is a big deal. And it's honestly just a little challenging to roleplay. Like, it's just a little bit like I don't quite know. And it would be cool to have some kind of a subclass that is built like that.
Well, you could just have a possession class where it's were you bit by a werewolf as a subclass? Were you bit by a vampire as a subclass? Possessed by a ghost?
Or like an ancient
like
spirit?
What is
that's cool.
controlling you?
I like that. That's a strong idea. I think that's cool.
I think it's a sweet idea too.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah. For me, this is a weird idea, but I feel like, and this is not necessarily true, but I feel like people don't chain off of each other as much as I would want them to in the party. Like, I think there's a lot of people or like skills that like allow you to build a really cool build for yourself, but I don't find that people like really necessarily build their builds around each other as much. I do think people like try to cover the holes, like, all right, we need someone who's a little bit tankier, we need some like stuff like that. But I think it'd be really fun to have like a golf caddy kind of like
like a squire.
Like a squire, someone
really
who's like doesn't do anything in combat but just facilitates other people. So it's like almost like, okay, the wizard and the sorcerer and like all these other people have these things that they can do, but maybe it requires a lot of effort or prep. And they can't just do it on their own, or like maybe there are certain tools that are required for combat that different people could use at different times to like create all these cool scenarios. I think it would be really fun to have someone whose like main role is to just go around and like avoid everything they can and just support people.
That's a rad idea, because you could have like if there was like an actual ability to be like distract in a way that would give like a rogue an even more powerful sneak attack.
Yeah.
Or if there was a thing of like, oh, I can like use this item. I'm standing behind the wizard and I can use this item to add a certain amount of extra damage dice to the next spell that they cast. Like there could be interesting like combos like that where you're like, my whole thing is to kind of like set up these like power moves.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, and it won't work every time, and it's just gonna be like you scrambling around to make these really cool things work. It's almost like, I don't know, setting up like a Magic the Gathering like big final thing. It's like you go around the whole session or like the whole combat encounter and just like try to make one of these big ideas work. I think it'd be really fun. That's part of why I like really love bards and illusion kind of based magic, because I think it's kind of like a little bit more control-y. Yeah. But I think it'd be fun to have a golf caddy. We'll call it the golf caddy.
The golf caddy.
Yeah. I agree. I think it'd be cool. Like
the squire was probably
like
better.
A trapper subclass or something. Like I could see him scurrying around, like throwing marbles on the ground and just like try and help in any non-combat way possible.
Yeah, you gotta find somebody with that 1,000 ball bearings.
There you go.
Those 1,000 balls.
Well, these are great ideas. I noted a further question on the Discord that's very similar. We're not going to answer today, but it was asking if WorldSmith would ever make a class generator. We're not going to answer it today, but
we've answered it in the Discord.
We have answered it in the Discord. You can hop in the Discord and take a look. We'll talk more about that in a little bit because I do think that's a very fun idea. And WorldSmith, I think, has the capabilities to do such a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, the main thing that we wanted to talk about today before wrapping up is how to GM for first-time players. This is a question that I've heard a lot just from kind of like friends who are thinking about starting a game. It's a question I've thought a lot about because I've played with a lot of first-time players, and some people on our Discord have been asking about as well. Because a lot of the people on the WorldSmith Discord are first-time GMs. WorldSmith's super good to learn how to GM. It's really helpful to pull together your first session and your first monsters and first NPCs and things like that. So I think it kind of is not surprising that a lot of people who are GMing for the first time are also working with players who are playing for the first time. They've got a bunch of friends together. No one quite knows how to play D&D, and you're all kind of setting out on it. So, yeah, I was just curious to kind of kick off that question and ask the two of you what has been your experience playing with first-time players, and what might be some advice you would give to GMs who are playing with first-time players?
Yeah, I think all players fall into one of three categories. I want you to imagine a triangle, okay? There's the players who are obsessed with combat and crunching numbers. There's the players who are obsessed with role play and lore. And then there's the very social players who do it for fun. They like to laugh at the table. And a first-time player every single first-time player lands somewhere in that triangle, right?
Pretty solidly.
You can slide around. Maybe they're a mix of two. But I think when you're playing with new players who have no idea what they're getting themselves into, you got to set expectations, first of all, for what kind of game it's going to be. But also, if you want to hook them, you kind of got to feed into their wants, because if they're a combat-oriented player and you don't do any combat on session one, they're not going to play D&D again, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, I like that triangle thing. Is nice to think about. Yeah. I think that is true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. I think, honestly, preparation is typically the most important thing. And I think part of the reason for that is, as a new player, I think typically there's a few issues that you face. There's, maybe you just freeze up because you don't know what you can do. Yeah. I think the biggest issue is always you don't know your character sheet and what your abilities are typically. As a new player, that's almost always the number one problem you have. And then I think as secondary problems, there's people who just don't really feel comfortable with role-playing yet and can't really get super into character. And then third, I find there's typically 1 in 10 new players, there's someone who just wants to do crazy stuff. That kind of I'm kind of talking about murder hobos. That's a little bit it. But there's also people who just are okay, we're in a great important role-playing scene, and they want to walk up and punch the king or something like that, or they want to kill their own party members and trying to get a reaction, kind of big gags kind of a thing. And I think a lot of the time it can be funny, and that's what they're going for. They're trying to have fun with it, but I think sometimes it comes at the expense of the story. So I think just being able to prepare people well for each of those. So the character sheet, like you said, just make sure that you have an in-depth session. It's their first time playing. Sit with them, help them make their character sheet. I often, when it's a first-time player, I have those little cards that D&D makes, that shows what their spell is, and I'm all right, these are the spells
the spell
you've
cards
chosen.
Are really helpful for starting players.
Yeah, here they are. You know what
then you can also
do.
even flip them over if you don't have the spell slot to cast it anymore. Just kind of limiting your options and stuff.
Yeah, and just almost if you have the time for it, sit with them and make them go through a really small combat kind of scenario. You don't have to run a combat, but be okay, let's say there's this guy, you want to stab him, what do you do, right? And you just make them roll dice once before they ever do it, right? And then obviously helping them during it, making them feel comfortable, okay, they roll and you're all right, now add this and this, right? And they look for it, you be patient, stuff like that. So I don't know.
I think just having the patience. I even get surprised as someone who's grown up playing D&D. I even get surprised playing with players who I've been playing with for a year or two, or when I say oh yeah, that's going to be it's roll a d8, and then they'll be which one is that? Which and I think just not just being prepared for that, just being prepared for if you've been playing a lot of role playing games, that is such a simple no-brainer thing for you to be able to look at this strange pile of shapes and identify that one of them has 8 sides. Like, I think just recognize that's something you have maybe learned from years and years of experience that even a player who might have been playing for a long time is just not going to remember. And just having like the patience for that, handing people the dice sometimes, not making it seem like it's a big deal or that like they should be ashamed of the fact that they don't know what a D20 is, and like walking through the character sheets and stuff. I love playing with new players almost more than experienced players sometimes. Because it just means that you in some ways have more control over the table, right? Like I think some people who have been playing a lot of D&D, they go in with a very set idea of what D&D should be because they've maybe played with a bunch of GMs before,
or they watch Stranger Things,
or they've watched Stranger Things, or they've listened to Matt Mercer's podcast or something. So it's like, and the wonderful thing about sitting down with especially if it's a whole table of first-time players or a whole table of first-time players and a couple experienced players who are like chill and down for the experience, is that like no one is going to have an expectation of what the game necessarily should be. Like you can basically set up exactly what you want, and you can even just be, like you can. I think it's also easy to just like play things more straightforward. Like. I played a really good game. It was a lot of first-time players. It was like 8. It was like a party of 8 first-time players.
That's wild.
Which was crazy. And I actually just pre-built. There were 2 of the players that I could tell were like wanted to get really nerdy into it. They really wanted to read the player handbook. They wanted to think about all the options. And then 6 of the other players, they wanted to just show up and have fun and not have any prep. And I just built character sheets for them. And I just built them like the most like basic expected choice. Like it was just like half-orc barbarian, you know what I mean? Like dwarf fighter,
stereotypical
elf wizard. Like just build, like just don't like and with first-time players, they're excited about that. Like they're not going to be looking at this and being like, why aren't I like a Titan artificer? Like they have no idea.
They don't know what that is.
So it's just like they're going to be stoked about being like, oh, I'll play like a halfling druid who has like Circle of the Moon, like just like the standard picks or whatever. They pick the standard spells, standard equipment, and they're gonna get excited about it. So it's like, I also think that's a good like lesson learned, is like in some ways playing with first time players is a bit of a relief, because it's like you don't have to, I think, do a bunch of hijinks. Like you can have a party of very normal characters that, their first mission could be going into a cave, fighting some goblins and getting a treasure chest with 100 gold pieces in it. And they will probably have a blast doing it if they're first time players, because it's all new to them. And you don't, I think, need to necessarily come up with some huge complex thing with, like lies and deception and politics and stuff. Like they probably just want to roll some dice, deal some damage, cast a spell or two, like fry some goblins, and they'll probably have fun with it.
I don't know. You didn't start with D&D as your first TTRPG, correct? Or
no, I did.
Oh,
yeah,
you did?
I like old. I started like 3.5. Yeah.
Okay, so there was this moment I remember in my first ever session where I asked my DM if I could do something, and he let me do it. And that is something that new players have never experienced before, right?
Yeah.
Not often do you get the opportunity to like go talk to a stranger and like barter for goods or something, right? Like if you're playing a video game, every single item has a price point. You don't have the option to steal it. You don't have the option to like try to say something to influence that decision. And that goes into every single aspect of D&D. And I think it's why the game is rising in popularity so fast, is people love the unexpected, the unknown, right? And there's something about GMing for a first-time player and seeing that like light in their eyes where they're like, wait, I can actually like cut this rope and jimmy rig a trap and like embrace this encounter in a whole different way than what is often expected. Right?
Yeah, I love that actually, because I think especially people are nervous because like they think they have the set list of things that they can do, and they kind of do in combat and stuff like that. But for the most part, you can do anything. Even in combat scenarios, you can try and do something really wacky. And as soon as you like let them figure that out, and you really encourage them, be like, yeah, you can do that. That's a great idea. Then they don't feel as much pressure like to really know everything and like feel like they have to know all these crazy things. It's just they can do whatever they want. And I think that makes it a lot easier for them in general.
And then you get those, like, you get the fun, like, I've also a lot of times had, like, first-time players try, like you said, like, I think you are going to get players who are going to do stuff that you really don't expect. That feels very like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they just decided to do that. I'm reminded of a game of I was running Pathfinder, but I was like, it was a session 1. They like got into this town, and there was like an orc player. He was an archer. He was like really excited about hunting. So he starts like hunting birds, but like in the town, like they're in a city. So he's like climbing onto the roofs and he's like hunting birds. And again, it's this thing of him being like, I can just do whatever I want. But then I'm like, oh, the city guards are like getting a little suspicious. You're like running around the rooftops with a bow and arrow, and he like doesn't stop. And so then I'm like, well, they're going to arrest you. So then like they arrest him, and then they take him to the guardhouse, and now the rest of the party has to like break him out, and they end up burning the barracks down. And then like they like
it's butterfly effect.
No, but it's awesome. Like I think just embrace the fact that like your first 10 players, they are going to try stuff that's really wacky. And like you said, I think if you're prepared, just going in with a general sense of, hey, I have some kind of things in my back pocket that could happen. I'm prepared enough. I understand kind of like the location they're in enough to be able to have some cause and effect things happen. Yeah. I think just embrace that. Just like really let that really guide your story. There was another first session I ran. It was that game with the 8 first-time players. Yeah. And they got the first session, they got into an encounter with like 5 or 6 goblins. And one of them had one of the bards cast charm on one of the goblins, because he was like, this is a spell I can do, and so I can charm a monster, and it worked. And so then they had this goblin that was charmed, and then they killed all the other goblins, and but then they were like really wanted this goblin to be their friend, and so suddenly I was like, okay, so I gave the goblin a name, and he became like an NPC, and then followed them for like a year of gameplay. They ended up jumping into the future. And left the goblin behind, so he died. But then in the future, like 300 years later, like this ended up being like 2 years later in the game, they like met a tribe of goblins that had descended from Grimlock the Goblin, who remembers them as the heroes that like rescued their friend. And so then they got this army of goblins like behind them to go help them take this city.
So I love that.
And it's like all of that because a player who'd never played a bard before looked at their character sheet and was like, charm. And they were like, what does that spell do? And then I explained it to them, and he was like, I'm going to use it on that goblin. And like, that's a thing that an experienced player would probably be like, that's a waste of a spell slot.
I'm not going to charm goblin.
But like, just be okay with that. Like, just be like, now that's a part of the story. Make that significant and fun, and like then it'll just give your story more flavor in my experience.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Do you guys remember your first? I call it like aha moments where you're like, oh wait, this is how D&D works. For me, it was Lost Mines of Phandelver, the first cave you go in. There's 2 starving wolves in cages. Yeah. And I was a druid, and I cast Speak with Animals, and I fed them some food. And I got these 2 dire wolves to fight with us the entire combat, and it like made things so much easier. And I loved my character because I was like, only I could do that, right? Do you guys remember like your first moment as a player? It's a long time ago.
Yeah. I want to say my first ever campaign was. What is it called? Out of the Abyss or Into the Abyss? Out of the Abyss, I think. I think it's Out of the Abyss. Yeah. And that is honestly, that's not the greatest for a first time player. It's
terrifying.
But it was really fun to be in there, and like I didn't really feel like it was like, oh, I can do whatever, but you start with all these NPCs as part of your group kind of a thing. And it was so intriguing to like try and figure out who I could trust and like who was cool and who wasn't, and then like rolling wrong for it, and then realizing that this person who I trusted and like felt super confident about for the whole game like ended up betraying us and being evil, and I was like and like I don't know, I think just like realizing, okay, like you can do things and they have fun consequences is like a really good way to I think it's a fun, insightful moment for any player.
Mine's kind of funky. I GM'd before I ever played.
Wow.
So I
That's a wild way to start, man.
It was cool. I mean, we kind of inherited the rule books from a family friend, and I had younger siblings, and my older brother was playing, but he was kind of playing with his own friends, and then I kind of had like siblings who were quite a bit younger than me, so I was like looking through, so we had the 3.5 player handbook and the 3.5 monster manual. And so I basically just read those as a kid. Oh, there goes my timer. We're getting close to the end of the podcast.
It'll never end.
But I remember just flipping through those. So I would say that maybe my first And it is interesting because this is really formative to how I run sessions now. But I would say that my first maybe moment of being like, oh, this game potentially has a lot to offer was finding interesting monsters that had like just fun abilities. Like I remember in the 3.5 handbook, like looking at I can't remember what they were called. Like it wasn't dry, maybe it was Dryad or something, but it was some kind of like a fairy creature that its whole thing was just around like charming you, putting you to sleep and stuff like that. And I think I remember like reading that step. Like I remember being like, wow, did you ever fight that? Like at first being like, I was like a 10-year-old kid, because I was like, wow, did you ever fight this monster? Like, you know what I mean? It's just like a woman in a dress who's standing in the woods, you know what I mean? But then like really reading through it and thinking through it and being like, oh, like if I had this thing show up, they could like make the characters fall asleep and then they could like steal their equipment or something. And that might
10 times worse than getting hit.
Right. And that might be like a way more of an engaging encounter than just, fighting against like an ogre or something. So I do think that was kind of maybe my kind of like first moment of realizing kind of what you're saying of like this game is bigger than just kind of like a video game where you run out and punch things. Mm-hmm. And there's really opportunities to tell very, fun and engaging stories. So, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, playing with first-time players is great. I hope you all get to do it. Like we said, we on the Discord, we have like a lot of first-time GMs, which is really fun. A lot of people starting their own games and a lot of people just like asking advice. So if you have more questions about GMing or if you want to play D&D for the first time, then hop in the Discord to find a party or just bounce your ideas. And there's a lot of people giving helpful feedback. And we will be back next week with another episode of Behind the GM Screen.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, you guys.
Check out WorldSmith.
Check it out.